What secret are you taking to your grave but ready to share anonymously? In my small town, my parents were the pillars of the community. My dad was a dedicated firefighter. My mom was a beloved teacher's aide. But behind that white picket fence facade, they were running a professional long con that cost me my soul. From the ages of 3 to 8, I was enduring systemic abuse from the town's fire chief. He was my father's boss. For years, I lived in a haze of confusion and fear. But the most disturbing part isn't just what he did. It's that my parents knew. They didn't just suspect. They were fully aware. Why didn't they stop it? It's simple and sickening. Career. My father wanted to rise through the ranks. My mother wanted the social standing that came with being connected to the town's elite. I was the silent price they paid for their professional and community comfort. While my 4 siblings were kept safe and treated like normal children, I was the sacrificial lamb. As I hit my teens and early 20s, the fog started to lift. I didn't have the full memories yet, but I was clearly a broken person. I was severely depressed, anxious, and deeply confused. My parents saw the writing on the wall. They knew that eventually I might start putting the pieces together. To protect themselves, they launched a preemptive strike. They began a systematic manipulation of our entire extended family. They told my aunts, uncles, and cousins that I was unwell. My mother took it a step further, telling people in town that I had a severe chemical dependency. The truth? I have never touched a heavy illicit substance in my life. I've never seen a needle, let alone used one. I use some natural relief occasionally to deal with the overwhelming internal pressure, but that's it. By labeling me unstable, they insured themselves. They knew that if I ever spoke the truth, no one would believe the word of a troubled soul over the respectable fire department family. It was a brilliant, evil plan. The wall finally broke when I was 30. It wasn't through traditional talk therapy. That never worked for me. It happened through a combination of medical supervision and a guided session with a shaman. The memories didn't just trickle in, they flooded. I went back to my childhood home. I've always kept a massive distance from them, and found my old journals. Seeing the words written in my own childhood handwriting, the proof of what was happening and my pleas for help, it broke me in a way I can't describe. The crazy person my parents created didn't exist. The victim they tried to bury did. I called them. I didn't want a sit-down dinner or a reconciliation. I confronted them over the phone with the evidence and my memories. I expected a fight, or maybe a tearful confession. Instead, they simply stopped talking. They went completely silent and have never reached out to me again. No denial, no apology, just the silence of people who knew the game was finally up. Sometimes I think about writing letters to everyone. The cousins who look at me with pity, the family members who think I'm a lost cause. I want to tell them that the pillars of the community they admire are actually people who sexually trafficked their own child for a promotion. It's a strange, isolated hell to live in. It turns my stomach to know they are out there right now, playing the role of doting grandparents to my siblings' kids. They are safe in their small-town bubble while I carry the weight of what they did. But I am healing. I am okay. I've pushed this down for a long time just to survive. But today, I'm letting it breathe. To anyone else out there who was the sacrificial lamb for a perfect family, I see you. It's a nightmare, but you aren't the crazy one. You never were. Edit. I mentioned therapy earlier, but to be clear, it was a doctor and a shaman who helped me break through the repressed memories. I only started traditional therapy recently to process aftermath. Thank you all for the support. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that people actually care. It is a staggering testament to your strength that you reclaimed your reality after your parents spent decades trying to trade your soul for a promotion. My roommate, let's call him Elias, was one of the kindest, most genuine human beings I've ever known. He was the guy who would stop to help a stranger change a tire in the pouring rain, or give his last $10 to a homeless person without a second thought. We were close, the kind of friends who felt more like brothers. We had a great apartment, we were figuring out our lives, and everything seemed fine. There had only been one incident before that night. About a month prior, I'd found him sitting in the kitchen at 3 a.m. staring at a blank wall. When I asked him what he was doing, he just looked at me with this hollow, distant expression and whispered, They're deciding if I'm allowed to stay. It was unsettling, but by morning, he was back to his usual cheerful self. I chalked it up to stress or a weird dream. I didn't know then that his family had a hidden history of schizophrenia. I didn't know that a psychotic break was blooming inside his mind like a dark flower. Then came the night that changed everything. I wasn't asleep. I was wide awake in my bed, the sheets twisted around my legs, paralyzed by a sound I'll never forget. The steady, rhythmic pacing in the hallway. It wasn't the sound of someone getting a glass of water. It was the heavy, deliberate tread of someone who was no longer himself. And he wasn't alone. Or at least, he didn't think he was. Through the thin walls of our apartment, I could hear him arguing. He was whispering at first, then his voice would rise into a frantic, jagged tone. He was talking to an entity, something he called by a name I couldn't quite make out. He was pleading with it, then agreeing with it. Then I heard him say it. "Okay, I'll do it. I'll use the knife." I heard the kitchen drawer slide open. The sound of metal clinking against metal, cutlery being shifted around, is normally such a domestic, harmless noise. That night, it sounded like a death knell. I heard him picking things up and putting them back down. He was literally debating with this voice about which tool would be the most effective for ending his own life. I didn't run out there. I didn't call out to him. I was 20 years old and consumed by a raw, primal terror that I have never felt since. My brain wasn't thinking about saving my friend. It was screaming, "He has a knife. He's lost his mind. If I go out there, am I next?" I reached under my bed and grabbed a heavy framing hammer I'd left there after hanging some pictures. I sat on the edge of my bed, knuckles white, gripping that hammer so hard my hands cramped. I sat there in the dark, listening to my best friend lose his battle with reality, ready to strike him if he turned my doorknob. The silence that followed the kitchen sounds was the loudest thing I've ever heard. And then, the sounds of the struggle began. Not with someone else, but with himself. It was a wet, horrific sound. I stayed in my room. I stayed there until our other roommate's girlfriend came home, walked into the common area, and let out a scream that still echoes in my nightmares. When the police arrived, the nightmare took a different shape. Instead of seeing us as grieving friends who had just lost a brother, they treated us like suspects. They didn't care that we were traumatized. They separated us and interrogated us for hours. They couldn't wrap their heads around the fact that someone could, or would, do that to themselves with such violence. They kept asking me, "How did you sleep through that?" "I'm just a heavy sleeper," I told them, staring at the floor. I didn't hear a thing. I lied to the police, I lied to the paramedics, and eventually, I lied to Elias's mother. Seeing her at the hospital was the most gut-wrenching experience of my life. He was her only child. Seeing her world collapse in that waiting room changed me profoundly. It stripped away whatever remained of my childhood innocence. For a long time, I called myself a coward. I told myself that a real man or a real friend would have burst out of that room and tackled him, grabbed the knife, and called 911. But as I've grown older, I've realized that I was just a kid facing a situation no one is prepared for. It's been over 20 years now. I'm at peace with it mostly. I have a child of my own now, and when I look at them, I think of Elias's mom. I think of how much love she poured into him, only for a chemical glitch in his brain to take him away. Whenever something incredibly lucky happens to me, I like to think he's up there somewhere, being a bro and looking out for me. I talk about him with my wife sometimes. She knows he died, and she knows it was a tragedy. But she doesn't know about the hammer. She doesn't know that I was awake, gripped by fear, listening to the end. That part of the story is just between me and the universe. I still miss him every single day. He was an amazing human being, and I hope wherever he is, the voices are finally silent. You weren't a coward for being paralyzed by a nightmare in real time. You were just a kid surviving a situation that had no right answer. My family thinks my grandfather miraculously heard them fighting while he was in a coma. The truth is much darker. I've been sitting on this for years. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, I have to listen to my mother and her siblings complain about how cruel and senile my grandfather was in his final year. They call it a tragedy. I call it the only time I've ever seen true justice served. My grandfather was a self-made man. He wasn't flashy. He drove an old truck and wore flannels with holes in the elbows. We all knew he was comfortable, but nobody knew the scale of it. Then the first heart attack hit. It was a Tuesday. By Wednesday, he was in a coma, hooked up to a forest of machines. While I was sitting by his bed, holding his hand and praying for a blink, literally anything, the rest of the family was already circling like vultures. My Uncle Dave was the worst. Under the noble guise of making sure Grandpa's affairs were in order so the bills got paid, he went to the house. He didn't just look for bills. He tore the office apart until he found the portfolio. $2.8 million. Savings, stocks, and property. The moment that number was whispered in the hospital waiting room, the grief evaporated. It was replaced by a fever. I watched my mother and her siblings, people who should have been mourning their father, engage in a downward spiral of increasingly vicious infighting. They weren't arguing about his care. They were arguing about who deserved the lion's share. My aunt claimed she deserved more because she lived closest. My mom argued she needed it for her retirement. It was disgusting. They were splitting up his furniture and his bank account while his heart was still struggling to beat 10 feet away. Then, the impossible happened. He woke up. It took months of grueling physical therapy and specialty care. During that time, the vultures suddenly became doting children again, putting on fake smiles and hoping he hadn't noticed their absence. But a few months after he returned home, he called a family meeting. He sat there, looking smaller than he used to, but with eyes like flint. He told them he'd been semi-conscious the whole time. He told them he had heard every single word of their greed, every argument over his money, and every cruel comment about how he was taking too long to pass. He told them they were getting nothing. Everything was going to charity. The fallout was nuclear. They tried to sue. They tried to have him declared incompetent. They failed. A year later, the second heart attack took him. The family, fueled by a delusional hope that he hadn't actually changed his will, went into war mode again. At the reading of the will, the lawyer's office felt like a courtroom. The result was a bloodbath. He had kept his word. Out of that nearly $3 million, he had donated almost all of it to a local children's hospital and a veterans fund while he was still alive. He left $300,000 in a restricted trust. My cousins and I were given $10,000 each, and the trust was strictly for our student loans. Anything left over? Also to charity. As for my mother, my aunts, my uncles, and even his own sister, $100 each, a literal token so they couldn't claim they were forgotten in the will. The only exception was my cousin Abby. She's a widow with 3 small kids whose husband died in a freak accident 2 years prior. We found out years later that Grandpa had secretly paid off her entire mortgage before he passed and swore her to secrecy so the others wouldn't harass her for money. But here is the secret I will take to my grave. My grandfather wasn't conscious in that coma. The doctors said his brain activity was far too low to process speech. He didn't hear a single word of their fighting. I did. I recorded those arguments on my phone. I recorded Uncle Dave laughing about what he'd do with his inheritance. I recorded my mother saying he should just let go already. Once he was healthy enough to sit in his garden and understand the world again, I sat with him. I cried, and I played those recordings for him. I'm the reason they lost everything. He lied about being semi-conscious, so they would blame fate or miracles instead of me. He protected me until the very end, and in return, I helped him see the truth about the people he raised. I don't feel a shred of guilt. When I see my mom's $100 check framed in her house as a spite trophy, I just smile and think of Abby's paid-off house and the kids at the hospital. Watching the vultures get exactly what they deserved, a $100 reality check, is perhaps the most satisfying form of family whistleblowing imaginable. My grandfather was the rock of our family. He was a man of tradition, and the centerpiece of that tradition was the ring. It wasn't some diamond-encrusted gauntlet. It was a heavy, weathered silver band with a crest that had been worn smooth by 4 generations of men in our family. It had almost zero monetary value. If you took it to a pawn shop, they'd give you $20 for the melt value. But to us, it was everything. The tradition was clear. It went to the eldest son, then the eldest grandson. That was supposed to be me. Then the cancer took him. The grief was suffocating, but as soon as the funeral arrangements started, the performative mourning began. My Aunt Linda, who hadn't spoken to my grandfather in 3 years because of a dispute over a lawnmower, suddenly became the self-appointed guardian of his legacy. During the wake, she dropped the bombshell. "He loved that ring so much," she sobbed into a silk handkerchief. "It should stay with him forever. We should bury him with it. It's the only poetic way to end the cycle." I was stunned. The cycle wasn't supposed to end in a mahogany box 6 feet underground. It was a living history. My mother, too exhausted by grief to fight, just nodded and agreed. The rest of the siblings followed suit, high on the drama of a tragic, sentimental gesture. To them, burying a family treasure was a beautiful sacrifice. To me, it was an act of absolute lunacy. They were literally throwing away our history because they wanted to feel like they were in a movie. The day of the funeral, I hit my breaking point. I stood by the casket during the private family viewing. Grandpa looked peaceful, but that ring, it looked wrong on his finger. It looked trapped. His hands, which had taught me how to fish and how to fix a car, were cold. The ring was a symbol of life, and here they were, sentencing it to rot in the dirt. The room cleared out for a moment as they went to get the pallbearers ready. I was alone with him. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought I was going to pass out. I didn't even think. I just acted. I reached into the casket. I felt the chill of his hand, a sensation that still haunts my dreams, and I slid the band off his finger. It was stubborn for a second, catching on his knuckle, and I nearly panicked. When it finally gave way, I shoved it deep into my pocket. My hands were shaking so violently I had to clench my fists to hide it. I stood there, looking at his bare hand, feeling like a monster. But then I looked at the ring in my pocket. I felt a weird sense of peace. I wasn't stealing from him. I was rescuing a piece of him. The service went on. The casket was closed. The dirt was thrown. My Aunt Linda made a huge show of blowing a kiss toward the grave, whispering about how he was at rest with his prize. I stood there with the ring pressed against my thigh, feeling like the ultimate villain. It's been 24 years. The family still talks about that beautiful gesture. They brag about it to outsiders. "Oh, we buried the family crest with him. It was a different time, you know. We value sentiment over gold." Every time they say it, I have to bite my tongue so hard I taste blood. I've kept it hidden. Not in a jewelry box, but in a place so secure and secret that even my spouse doesn't know it exists. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I take it out. I hold it. I can almost feel the calluses on my grandfather's hands when I touch the worn metal. I'm an old man myself now. I look at my grandson, who has the same stubborn chin my grandfather had, and I wonder if I'll ever have the courage to tell him. Do I pass it to him on his wedding day and confess that his father's side of the family is built on a lie? Or do I take the secret to my own grave, making the theft permanent? Part of me feels like a guardian. Another part feels like a grave robber. But when I look at that silver band, I don't see a stolen object. I see a piece of our bloodline that didn't deserve to be buried in the dark. It's mine, my own, my precious. You didn't rob a grave. You staged a rescue mission for a legacy that your family was too caught up in their own drama to actually value. Back in high school, we were all buzzing about our upcoming weekend class trip. It was one of those milestones you spend months talking about in the hallways. In my class, there was this girl. Let's call her Sarah. I had an immense amount of respect for her, which is a rare thing for a teenager to feel for a peer. Sarah's life hadn't been easy. Her mother had passed away from a long illness when we were kids, and she lived with her father, a war veteran struggling with severe PTSD. He wasn't a bad guy, but he had a hair-trigger temper and carried a heavy shadow. Despite all that, Sarah was the most driven, ambitious, and confident person I knew. She refused to be a charity case. She never complained, never played the victim, and would have been insulted if anyone even hinted at pitying her. We were different in a lot of ways, but I admired her grit. She worked twice as hard as the rest of us just to keep her head above water, and she did it with her chin up. One afternoon, a group of us were sitting around talking about the trip. I was being a typical teenager, rambling on about what snacks I was bringing and how excited I was for the hotel stay. I turned to her and asked if she was ready, and she just shrugged. "Yeah, I'm not going," she said, her voice completely casual. "We don't have the money for stuff like that right now. Anyway, did you guys see that car wreck on the news yesterday?" She moved the conversation along so fast it was like she'd practiced it. She didn't let the silence linger, didn't give anyone a chance to feel sorry for her. But I was left completely speechless. It felt profoundly unfair. Here was the hardest working person in our grade, someone who actually deserved a break, being left behind because of a few $100s. It bothered me all day. I knew Sarah well enough to know that if I offered to lend her the money, she'd turn me down in a heartbeat. She might even get angry. Her pride was her armor, and I wasn't about to pierce it. When I got home, I talked to my parents. My dad sat me down and gave me the best advice of my life. He said, "If you want to help someone who's too proud to take it, you have to give them a story they can believe in." We came up with a plan. My dad suggested I talk to our teacher and propose a deal. If all the other parents agreed to chip in just a few extra dollars, we could cover Sarah's cost. But the cover story would be that the travel agency had reached a certain threshold of students and granted the class one scholarship or free spot via a random lottery. If the other parents weren't on board, my parents told me we would quietly pay the entire difference ourselves. The next morning, I went to school early and intercepted our teacher. I laid out the whole situation. I told her about Sarah's pride, her situation at home, and my dad's plan. I made the teacher promise, on everything, that my name would never be mentioned. I didn't want the credit. I just wanted her on that bus. Our teacher was incredible. She spent the next 2 days making calls. To my surprise, every single parent agreed. It turned out that everyone respected Sarah, and they were more than happy to add a tiny bit to their own bill to make it happen. A few days later, the teacher stood up in front of the class. "I have some great news," she announced. "Because of our group size, the travel agency has awarded us one complimentary spot. I've gone through the registration dates, and the random winner is Sarah." I will never forget the look on her face. She burst out laughing, a genuine shocked sound of pure joy. She kept shaking her head, talking about how she never wins anything and how incredibly lucky she was. She went on that trip, and she had the time of her life. She was the life of the party, exploring every site and making memories that she still posts about on social media occasionally, even a decade later. I'm 30 now, and I still get a rush of happiness when I think about that 16-year-old version of myself. I wasn't a perfect kid, but in that moment, I got it right. I learned that the best kind of kindness is the kind that doesn't require a thank you. Sarah still thinks she got lucky. In a way, she did, but not because of a travel agency lottery. She got lucky because an entire community of people saw her worth and decided to protect her pride while giving her the break she deserved. I'll take that secret to my grave, and I'm perfectly okay with that. Orchestrating a miracle that preserves a friend's pride is the kind of quiet heroism that defines a person's character far more than any public thank you ever could. Thanks for watching. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on real human stories.